Good morning. From Classical 105.7 FM, this is Archive West Texas. I'm your host, Gordon Wilkerson. We're joined today by our producer, Thomas Dye, the man that makes this show happen. Each week, we bring you conversations with people whose vision, work, and lives have shaped the character of our region. Really pleased today to have Alex Scarborough. Alex is representing Tom's Tree Place, a family business in Lubbock that just celebrated its 75th anniversary of doing business. Tom's Tree Place was founded in 1950 by Alex's parents, Tom and Jeannie Scarborough. The company's grown from a tree nursery into a comprehensive landscaping enterprise that's known throughout West Texas. Welcome, Alex.
Well, Gordon, thank you, and it's an honor to be with you today. I appreciate the opportunity to tell our story.
So if there's a tree in Lubbock, Texas, is it a pretty good bet that somebody bought that and somebody planted that?
Yeah, this was a treeless plain. That's how it was described by Coronado when he crossed here. And Plains was a scary place. It was one of the last places to settle, but part of that was because it was so empty. It was a big, empty space, and people didn't feel comfortable there, felt alone. And so, the trees you see were all brought to West Texas, up here on the plains, and some have adapted. Some seem to prosper just fine. I joke that Ailanthus and, Virginia creeper will eventually own everything. Maybe a Siberian elm or two, but largely everything you see was brought here.
All right. We can't talk about Tom's Tree Place without talking about Tom Scarborough.
Yeah.
Tell our listeners where your dad was born, how he got to Lubbock, and why, of all things, he decided to go into the tree business.
Well, Dad was born in a community called Wool Market in South Mississippi, near Biloxi. Had a home next to a national forest, and my grandfather was a sawyer. So they sawed what's called Gulf cypress lumber. And they would go into the swamp there and drag out big old cypress stumps that had been submerged for 100 years, and they would saw those into premium lumber. And so that was the business that Dad grew up in, and what he thought he would go into is some sort of forestry or lumber business of some kind. And so after World War II, which was incredible, my dad started World War II as a high school dropout and ended World War II as a naval officer flying aircraft. And so it was a very transformational time. But after the war was broke, and like a lot of people, took the opportunity of the GI Bill to go to school. His first choice was A&M. Went to A&M to try to get into school, and they said there was so many people from Texas coming that they was only accepting in-state students. And they suggested he might travel to the University of New Mexico, and they had a forestry program up there. And so he hitchhiked. He caught a truck down in Bryan, and the guy said, "Well, I'm going to Lubbock." And he said, "You can, he'd take Dad along if Dad would drive the truck all night." This was just different times. And so, Dad drove. They arrived at the intersection of Broadway and College Avenue about daybreak. And Dad saw his first tumbleweed roll across. And he had some Navy friends that he thought were going to Texas Tech, so he thought he'd stay here and look them up. And he did find them, and they convinced him he should stay at Tech for a semester. He could study. They didn't have forestry at Texas Tech, but they had horticulture. He wouldn't waste his time, and so they went to the registrar's office, and they all swore he was from East Texas, and he got enrolled in Texas Tech University. So that's how he got to Lubbock.
That's a great story.
Yep.
So how did he decide to start Tom's Tree Place?
Well, the next part of that story is he did all kinds of stuff. He was a builder. He was a pretty good carpenter at that point. Growing up in the lumber business probably helped that. He would go to a place that had a little grill in the back called College Avenue Drug, and he met a waitress that was working there. That was her dad's store, and he got interested in her, and she got a little interested in him, and that was my mom and dad's meeting where they met. And so they got married while they were both still in school, against my grandmother's best advice, but they still did it. They could make it. And while Dad was finishing school, they did a lot of stuff. He worked for the police department at one time. During that time, his first job was he was driving the chief around. One day they figured out that Dad didn't even have a driver's license. So they had to stop and go get him a driver's license. They didn't have driver's license in Mississippi, I guess. And so he got his driver's license. There was an old nursery near Broadway, and where there's a restaurant now. If you go down that alley, what's that restaurant? Mesquite's, yeah. That was a nursery at one point, and he worked with that guy, did a little work. They didn't have a vehicle, so everywhere they went, they walked. And they lived in that neighborhood. Of course, the city was much smaller then, and
this was
late 40s.
Late 40s, early 50s. I think population in Lubbock 1950 was around 95,000 maybe.
Yep, 70,000, I think.
70, yeah.
Yep. And anyhow, there was two twin brothers that lived across the alley from them. They were the Rankin brothers, Rankin, and one was my pediatrician. Later I think they both became doctors, but Dr. Rankin was my pediatrician growing up. But they had a pickup, and so Mom and Dad bought a spray rig, and together with the Rankins, they started spraying bagworms out of poplar trees and could make a pretty good living doing that, they discovered. Everybody wanted the bugs knocked out of their trees. So that's kind of where they started. Later, Dad had a customer that said, "I never can find you. You need a business place." And Dad said, "Well, if some of these people that own land would help me out, maybe I could do that." She said, "Well, I got a place for you." And so she had, Mom and Dad bought an acre of land from Mrs. Green on West 34th Street. That happened in about 1950, about the time he got out of college. And they built a home on that site and the nursery. And so that was their house and business.
We've got to take a quick break here. So we're visiting today with Alex Scarborough, talking about history of Tom's Tree Place. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Archive West Texas. We're continuing our conversation with Alex Scarborough of Tom's Tree Place. In our last segment, Alex was talking with us about how his father Tom grew up in Mississippi, was familiar with the lumber business, and how he made his way to Lubbock. Take us back to 1950, Alex. What was Lubbock like, and what was the community like when the business got its start?
Well, 1950 is a really interesting time to look at Lubbock. Lubbock had grown 125% from 1940 to 1950. And its population in 1950 by the census was 71,747 people. You know, the great cathedrals up and down Broadway were built about in that 1950s. And a lot of it was because people had come back from the war. They'd seen things while they were overseas. It changed a lot of people's vision for what they wanted their communities to look like. And so Lubbock was a great community. It had a Reese Air Force Base here. We had a developing agriculture market that was incredible. Irrigation was coming online, places that was really changing. And of course, Texas Tech being here solidified what Lubbock was. And so it was just a great place to be and do business in 1950.
Growing, thriving community, and your parents have an acre out on West 34th Street
Yeah.
with a house and
Yeah.
a business.
Now-
Talk with us about how the business grew from spraying bagworms and
Yeah.
what they established on that 1 acre, and
Well,
some of the early challenges and how that came together.
1950 Lubbock, basically the south extents was 19th Street. College Avenue was what is called then. Today's University Avenue was the west extents. It went out to Clovis Road, out to Avenue A. So 34th and Slide was way out at the edge of town. Wasn't much out there. There was a drive-in movie theater at the end of Slide Road and 34th Street, and that was called the Sunset Drive-In. And beyond that, there wasn't much out there. They were surrounded by
Just a dirt road at this time?
farms. No, 34th was a little 2-lane, dim.
Okay.
You know,
And Slide?
Slide was paved, and so was the Brownfield Highway.
Okay.
But all of them 2-lane roads that came to Lubbock, and there they were kind of out in the country. That first year, that fall, they raked locust beans, and Dad would say 1 million, at least thousands of beans they planted that year, and they grew those. Other nurseries that would use those for grafting material. And so that first year they grew tons and tons of locust beans. And they were Dad was still doing his spraying and maintenance. They were doing some pruning. And a guy named Bob Foote from Durant, Oklahoma, Durant Nursery, was the first guy that really extended them credit to buy some nursery stock. And so that was our first supplier. And he was a great man. I knew he stayed with our company for about 40 years. Bob Foote would call on us, and we bought from them. And at any rate, that was how they got started. We would do a little bit of landscape then, but it was a little bit limited. But one of the things, Dad was a great observer, and he had seen the oak trees in central Texas. And so early in the 50s, there was a family building a house in Tanglewood, the Payne family. And Mr. Payne had run off every landscape guy that had gone by there. Dad knew most of those. And so he took it as a challenge to go see him. And he was building a rock wall around his house. And when Dad drove up, he said, "I'm not doing any landscape." And Dad said, "I'm just here to look at your rock wall." And so they struck up a conversation. As Dad admired his wall, Mr. Payne asked him, "What would you put around this wall?" He said, "Well, the only thing I could think of it would be pretty for this wall would be live oak trees." And Mr. Payne said, "That's what I was thinking." And so they went down south of Abilene and dug the trees. Mr. Payne went with them. He dug too. And they dug a load of live oaks and brought them to Lubbock. And as far as I know, those were the first live oaks ever brought to Lubbock. They started there. And, you know, when you bring something different to a community, other people see that
Take
and
notice.
they want that. And so that's what they built off of.
So you stayed with the original acre. That's still where you're located today?
Yep, we still occupy the house that Dad built. That's our retail business, and it all still functions, although we've changed the function through the years. And so
I have to ask you about the floor, because that's been the same way ever since I was 5 years. I guess it looks like, I call it the Jackson Pollock floor, because it's got the paint splat. How does that, whose idea was that?
That was Dad's idea. He had a hardwood floor in there, but instead of staining it, and like everybody else, he took epoxy paint and he dribbled it in several colors all over the floor. And it has been a trademark, and we've redone it a time or two, but it turns out to be a really pretty durable floor, and it gets a lot of comments. A lot of people notice that. So in that time frame, a lot of, the city was growing. Lots of people were coming back. Homer Maxey's book is a great book about that time. And he recognized that Lubbock was growing even before the war and came back. And so Arnott Benson neighborhood was being developed. And then the neighborhood just south of the nursery began to be developed in the late 50s. And this was affordable housing that the GIs bought. And these houses came with yards. And people,
needed a tree,
they needed a tree, they needed a shrub. And so that became a big part. And most of the work, honestly, then was do it yourself. A lot of people that came to our nursery and bought stuff. But then we got to design, and Dad worked on some other nicer projects. People wanted something a little different. The patio was a innovation of the day, and kind of went along with the kidney-shaped swimming pool and a lot of things like that were part of that modern design era. And so he got to work with some people doing work like that. And most businesses of the day, they didn't do a lot of landscape in the 50s. Their main feature was acres and acres of free parking.
There you go.
That's what they would sell. But there was a shopping center that was built. It's called Town and Country Shopping Center, across from Texas Tech Stadium.
That was it. What
That
was
would
then
be
4th Street and University?
Yeah, 4th and University.
Or College.
Yeah, College Avenue back in the day. And they had a little interior space that they wanted landscaped, and so it kind of set the trend. It was really the first place that did landscape in their parking lot and in the interior spaces. And so by today's standards, it would be minimal, but by those standards, it was quite extravagant, and it really set them apart. And so we got to be involved. One of the first commercial projects that really recognized the benefits of what landscape could do for their property.
We're talking today with Alex Scarborough of Tom's Tree Place. Take a quick break and be right back with more from Alex. Thanks for listening. Welcome back to Archive West Texas. We're continuing our conversation with Alex Scarborough of Tom's Tree Place. Alex, we talked a little bit about your family history and how the business got established and then how it began to grow in the early 50s. Tell us what some of the family values are that were important when the business was founded and that continue to be critical for your success today.
One of the founding principles of my dad was we were going to be closed on Sunday. Sunday was, for him, that was the Christian Sabbath, and he wasn't going to do any work on the Christian Sabbath. And my mom had come from her background, being open 7 days a week and working as hard as you can, and didn't ever know when to stop. And but at any rate, she went along with that until one Christmas. And to make it through winter, they sold Christmas trees. Christmas tree is a really diminishing asset to have in stock. It loses value by the minute. And when you've invested a lot of money in trees, you're sitting out there just hoping you can get it back and fresh cut trees. So she goes to the store one day on a Sunday to pick up something, and while she's there, a car pulls up. She sells them a Christmas tree. Before she can get them gone, another car pulls up. And she's got a big business going. And my dad, an hour or so later, is wondering, where's Jeannie? And he loads up and drives down there and sees what's going on. And he promptly chases the customers off and puts a lock on the door. Says, "We're not doing this." It was a principle of his, and he wasn't gonna go away from that. That and my parents' dedication to tithing every day, every dollar that they made. And it was a principle I grew up with. It was, I think, incredible that they always honored the Lord and what they did in that way. Always involved in a lot of churches. They were charter members of many of the churches that were springing up in Lubbock at the time, and always interested in that expansion. But those were kind of founding principles that I call on. Now, on work day, Dad believed in working. You got up early, and he was a really time in motion is what he would say, that you've got to be productive during your work time, and he believed in that. But those were principles I would say that the company was founded on.
Those are great foundational principles. Let's talk a little bit about the challenges of landscaping in an area like West Texas. I mean, you've got wind, you've got drought, you've got different soil and temperature extremes. Talk through the science of that.
Well, we're like we started with, we live on a treeless plain, so about everything that we see and appreciate is something that was planted here. It's cultivated here. So our landscape in Lubbock usually involves some extra work and extra things. Since our founding, we've been introducing, trying different plants, different things, different techniques, and we can tell you a lot of things that don't work here because we've experienced that. And then we've also developed a core group of plants that do work here. We kind of stay in that group of plants that are going to work in Lubbock, Texas, with reasonable effort. And so that's part of the principles of what we try to promote in Lubbock. There's no use in trying to grow a rhododendron or an azalea in Lubbock, Texas. It's just prone to failure. It's not going to happen.
Yeah.
But the other part of that is recognizing what we can grow, and there are so many beautiful things that we can grow, and a whole lot of that in the last 20 years has been incredible. Before that, most of the plants that were in production because they were easy to produce by the growers. Most had come from Asia, and so we had a lot of Asian plants that we sold. But in the last 20 years, much more adaptation of things that are from the Southwest. And they really do have a look and a flair and do well. And it's a place that it's unique for us.
How have the desires of customers changed over the last 75 years?
Well, Dad would say, that people will appreciate what we do more and more as time goes by. And that's held true. People have been to nice places, and once you've experienced that, you want to have that your place, or your business, or and so it speaks how your yard is maintained. It speaks to your neighbors about certain values that you have, and it communicates to the city of how business is maintained and how it looks. And so as what we've seen is over time is that is just an increase in interest, and honestly to the point now where it's almost required to maintain a certain standard if you're going to have status that you want in a neighborhood.
Do you have any concerns about sustainability of these landscapes and how much water they require and maintenance?
So a landscape that word is a loaded word, sustainable, and it has a context that sometimes I question because it seems to mean perpetual to some people. It seems that something that could just be put into a landscape and last forever. And landscapes wear out. That's what they do. They're a changing commodity, and that's
Just
That's
like any
everything.
other living organism.
Living and even your driveway at your house is over time is going to wear out.
Right.
You have to replace it. And so, but what you want to do, and conservation kind of goes along with that. And the best definition for conservation that I like is using the resources as many times as you can before it gets away from you. And so that's what we try to do, is create a landscape that will deliver results that are desirable in a way that is affordable and that people can keep and enjoy. And so that's what sustainable looks like to us.
It's a good definition.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing that with us. We're talking today with Alex Scarborough of Tom's Tree Place. Alex, thank you for being with us today. There's more to this story. We're going to continue for another episode, but we're going to draw this one to a close. Appreciate you listening today. Want to make sure that you know that if you have suggestions for future guests, or if you'd like to listen to any of our past episodes, please visit us online or contact us through our app at classical1057.org.